Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to watch this recorded presentation for session 2 of our CoreTrustSeal Assembly of Reviewers workshop series. My name is Jonas Recker and I'm the chair of the CoreTrustSeal board, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the session. So session 2 of this Assembly of Reviewers workshop will focus on what we as reviewers can expect to see in an applicant's response. You will work on this topic with hands-on exercises in small groups, and you will then get an opportunity to discuss your findings and any questions in the plenum. I will begin by looking at the expected detail and length of responses. So as a rule of thumb, reviewers and readers of the final public application document should be able to understand the requirement response without having to read through large amounts of supporting evidence. And from the perspective of the board and in our experience, in most cases, it should be possible to meet this expectation with a response that is about 500 to 800 words long. And just to illustrate what 800 words or 500 words might look like, I've taken a screenshot of an application PDF. And what you see here are 350 words, and you can see that, that's already quite a lot of text. In addition, when we look at response statements, applicants are expected to provide a cohesive statement that is tailored to their particular situation and setting. So even if the guidance and the extended guidance point out useful items to touch in the response, it is really important that applicants think about what is relevant in their particular situation and relevant to their particular service. Overall, if the response does not seem sufficiently clear or on point to you, please just return it to the applicant for elaboration or clarification. In this context, it is also important to remember that the responses and the supporting evidence are not just for your benefit, but should be understandable for the applicant's stakeholders once the application is made publicly available. And this already takes me to the question of the kind of evidence that we expect applicants to provide. So you are aware that each response statement provided by an applicant has to be backed by some sort of supporting evidence. And ideally, this evidence should be publicly available, for example, on the website of the applicant or maybe on the website of the applicant's hosting organization. But we are also, of course, aware that some evidence can only be shared confidentially. And if that is the case, we expect that applicants clearly state this in the response and thereby make it clear that the reviewers were given access to the documents in question. Overall, we as CoreTrustSeal board expect that applicants move forward to separate relevant evidence from confidential materials over time so that in the future a public version of now confidential evidence can be made available for the next review. And similarly, if documentation does not yet exist, is in progress, or is currently for internal use only, for example, if it's an internally used wiki, then we expect that there is a date of public availability in the response and in the application, so that by the time the applicant comes up for recertification and applies for recertification, we can check if this documentation has been made available. Another note is that as a reviewer, you're not expected to search for evidence on the website yourself. So if an applicant has not provided evidence, of course, sometimes, it's interesting to us and we check the website to see if the evidence is there potentially, but you're not required to do so. So if evidence is missing, you can simply request that additional evidence is supplied by the applicant. This also includes providing references to the relevant sections of very long documents that are given as evidence, by the way. So another important building block of applicant responses and reviewer assessment are compliance levels. Compliance levels indicate the degree to which an applicant meets a given requirement, and those levels range from 0, not applicable, to 4, fully implemented. The applicant must indicate a compliance level for each of the requirements, but it is the reviewers who judge the compliance against the response statements and the supporting evidence. First of all, note that a compliance level of 1 or 2 is not sufficient to achieve CoreTrustSeal certification. So if an applicant indicates that they are at level 1 or 2 for any of the requirements, this means that they are not yet in scope for CoreTrustSeal certification. Then there are cases, and these are not extremely common, but they exist. There are cases when applicants believe that a requirement does not apply to them. So if they select compliance level 0, not applicable, they are expected to explain very clearly why they think that this requirement does not apply to them. So it's not sufficient to simply select a compliance level of 0 without further explanation. Based on the evidence that the applicant provided, reviewers can lower the compliance level that the applicant self-selected. If you lower the compliance level, please indicate in the comments of the review form why you lowered the level, and if this can be remedied by the applicant, for example, by providing further evidence or explanations. Generally, applicants are expected to increase compliance with the requirements over time. So if they select the compliance level 3 in their initial application, they are first of all expected to give you as reviewers an idea of when they think they can reach level 4 and which steps they will take in order to reach level 4. And then by the time that they renew their certification, we expect that, if something was on level 3 before, we expect that they have progressed to, or at least closer towards, a compliance level 4. If the information that the applicant provides is insufficient for you to come to a decision concerning the compliance level, simply leave the compliance level field empty and add a comment for the applicant explaining why the evidence they provided is not sufficient. Now, you will have noticed that there are some requirements where the compliance level depends on specific conditions that have to be met. The first group of cases concerns requirements 1, 3, and 10, where specific evidence has to be present in the response in order to reach compliance level 4. So for R1, which deals with the mission of the applicant, the guidance states that if data preservation is not referred to in the mission of the repository, then this requirement cannot have a compliance level of 3 or higher. And note that in consequence, this means that a repository does not qualify for CoreTrustSeal certification if there isn't public evidence that makes it very clear that they take responsibility for the long-term preservation of their collections. So unless there is a clear statement in their mission that says we take responsibility to preserve our collections for long-term use and access, then this means that they cannot receive CoreTrustSeal certification. So, and as a side note here, this mission does not necessarily have to be a mission statement on the website. It could be, but it also could be a reference to a legislation that governs the repository or a statement in the deposit guidelines. It could be a statement on the hosting organization's website, but it has to be somewhere. This is the bottom line. For requirement 3, it is necessary that the applicant refers to a succession plan, which includes a formal written agreement with another organization to reach compliance level 4. And then the final case of this class of special cases is requirement 10, the preservation plan. And requirement 10 can only be at level 4 if a preservation plan exists which details the applicant's approach to ensuring that their collections remain usable and understandable across technological change and across changes in the needs of their designated community. So only if this plan exists can this compliance level be the compliance level of this requirement be 4. In other cases, it would be 3 or lower. The second group of special cases with regard to compliance levels concerns repositories that provide access to sensitive data. And for these special group of repositories, both R2 licenses and R4 confidentiality and ethics have to be at level 4 for the applicant to receive CoreTrustSeal certification. So if a repository provides access to sensitive data, they cannot put compliance level 3 for either R2 or R4. Before I move on to the last topic of this presentation, I would like to have a brief look at the definition of the designated community which applicants provide under R0. The designated community, just as context, the designated community must be at the core of the applicant's effort to preserve their digital collections for reuse. So all preservation measures that the applicant implements and conceptualized, all of these measures must be tailored to this designated community. So wherever necessary throughout the entire application, the applicant has to show that the measures they implement are at all times in line with what the designated community needs. And this concerns, for example, measures described under R8 appraisal or under R11 data quality, R13 data discovery, and R14 data reuse. And in our experience, the definitions provided by applicants often tend to lack detail. And here are some hints that I would like to give to you as to what you should look for in a definition of the designated community. So in particular, the applicant should clearly describe who is included in the designated community, and note that it is possible and perfectly acceptable to define a designated community that is narrower than the group of stakeholders potentially interested in the collections. The second thing they should describe is the minimum skills and knowledge base that is required to use the collections. And the third aspect that should be mentioned in the definition is a response to the question, which needs does the designated community have? For example, concerning metadata, concerning file formats, concerning access conditions, and so on, because all of these aspects are important in planning preservation measures and planning, how the designated community is given access to the collections and how they are able to reuse the collections. And so if the applicant's definition does not give sufficient answers to these questions, ask them to revise the definition and add more detail. So to conclude this presentation, I would like to raise your awareness of what to look out for in what we sometimes refer to as complex applications. In the past, a typical CoreTrustSeal application may have come from a subject-based repository catering to a fairly concise and homogeneous designated community, and possibly also providing most, if not all, of their services to this community in-house. Today, increasingly, we receive applications where this is not the case, and this means that applications are becoming more complex. So, and this is the case, for example, when the designated community is very heterogeneous, or if it is composed of different subcommunities. It is the case if the repository holds different collections which are curated to different levels, or which are curated employing different workflows. And this is the complexity can also increase if the applicant provides services collaboratively with other partners. And the extreme case of this would be an applicant that is a consortium of different repositories, all of which have differing workflows and policies. And the place to look for, to find out if an application is more complex, the place to look for is in R0, and especially the description of the designated community, the level or the levels of curation and outsourced partners. So these sections of the application can contain indicators, if an application should be considered complex. And when you review such a complex application, it is particularly important to make sure that the applicant addresses this complexity throughout the entire application. And I'm going to give you some examples of this. For example, if there are multiple subcommunity that together form the designated community of the applicant, this must be reflected in the measures taken to ensure that the data can be discovered and reused. So if these subcommunities have different needs for reuse of data, then this has to be addressed in the application in the given requirement. Also, if there are different collections that the applicant curates and which are then preserved to different standards, this has to be addressed in the application whenever the applicant talks about appraisal, about the storage procedures, about preservation planning, the assessment of data quality, and the design of workflows. So whenever collections are treated in different ways in these areas, the response has to address these differences. A final example, if the applicant collaborates with others, the roles of each partner have to be clearly defined and addressed in the requirements in question. So whenever a service, a measure is not carried out solely by the applicant, but carried out with partners, then this has to be explained and made transparent. And I think that probably R15 and R16 are the requirements which most often are carried out in collaboration or together with a partner, for example, a technical service provider. So R15 and R16 are places where you could expect some mention of who has which responsibility in this regard. Well, I would like to thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. Please bring any questions that I have not answered or that may have, come out of watching this presentation. Bring all of these questions to our workshop session. And of course, you are very welcome to email those questions in advance to the email address given on these slides. Thank you and see you soon.